Hello world history students. Today I'm going to talk about chapter 3 section 3, which is all about Japan. So the early history of Japan. In the 1300s, Japan was united under powerful shoguns, or what were called military leaders. It was divided into the north and the south, and two powerful shoguns competed for control of Japan. These shoguns began to lose power during the 14th century, so the 1300s, and the country's territorial lords would battle for power for nearly the next 300 years. So let's take a look at some images. Here's the Japanese flag. Here is the location of Japan. Japan is across the sea from us in the Pacific Ocean, neighbors with Korea, China, and Russia. It is actually four different islands, not one island, but four large islands, and the capital is Tokyo, which we're going to talk about today. Okay, back to where we were. So, no, it's not where I want to be. Oh yes. From 1467 to 1568, Japan entered a period of civil war. It's a very dark time in the Japanese history, as most civil wars are. But over time, the daimyo took control of the land. After some struggles, daimyo Tokugawa Ieyasu completed the unification of Japan, and what he did was he required daimyo to spend every other year in the capital of Edo, which becomes Tokyo as we know it today. So he would have these different military leaders, or the daimyo, come and spend a year in the capital, and that way it would ensure the loyalty and ensure the peace of the region. So his period of rule is called the Tokugawa shogunate. He's quoted saying this: on his deathbed, he told his son, "Take care of the people, strive to be virtuous, and never neglect to protect the country." Society was very structured. They had a feudalistic form of society, much like we saw in Europe in the Middle Ages, with peasants at the bottom, and in this case, not the king, but the emperor on top. And in the middle, we have the samurai and other levels of society, much like the nobles and the knights in medieval Europe. During this time, there was an increase in employment opportunities for women, although it's still somewhat limited, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about life during the Tokugawa shogunate. And traditional culture thrived, which we're going to take a look at as well. So life in Tokugawa Japan, 250 years of stability, prosperity, and isolation. They did not, for the most part, allow, just like China, they did not allow Europeans to come in and trade to thrive. The feudal system is still in place, and although they promote Confucian ideals of the farmer being the most important part of society, peasants suffered the most in this society because of taxes, and over time, the wealthy flourish. So this is what Japanese feudalism looks like. On the top, you have the emperor, or the figurehead. He doesn't really rule so much as he's more like just a figurehead, a puppet in a way. The shogun were the ones with true power, the military generals. Below them, you've got the daimyos, spelled differently there. And then below them, you've got the warriors, the samurais. Below them, you see the peasants. And you'd think the peasants would be at the bottom, but until there's a shift in society and the merchants and the artisans become more valuable, they become 4 and 5, and the peasants go to the bottom at 6. The peasants are up higher. But as people begin to move to the city, to Tokyo, or Edo as it was called back then, the peasants go from 4 down to 6, and they carry the heaviest burden in society, which is going to be a theme we see throughout these feudalistic societies. When we look at the French Revolution, the peasants were at the bottom, and they rise up and they try to fight the system. That doesn't happen here in Japan yet. So before we talk about this, I want to show you a short video about life in Tokugawa, Japan. In 3, 2, 1.
In September 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who brought an end to more than 100 years of civil war in Japan, died in his sleep at age 62. He had hoped to pass on his ruling position to his 5-year-old son, trusting that his top aides would shelter the boy until he came of age. It was not to be. Hideyoshi's right-hand man, Tokugawa Ieyasu, wanted the power for himself. He amassed an army of 74,000 followers and led it against a force of 80,000 Toyotomi loyalists. The two armies clashed at a strategic crossroads called Sekigahara on October 21st, 1600. At the start of the battle, the Toyotomi warriors were already in place. Tokugawa Ieyasu advanced his samurai against them under the cover of early morning fog. As opposing groups of warriors blundered into one another, skirmishing broke out along the lines. Initially, the element of surprise gave the Tokugawa forces an advantage, but as the fog lifted and fighting intensified, momentum shifted against them. It looked as though Tokugawa Ieyasu might go down in defeat. Then, just in the nick of time, he saved himself with an adept political move.
What shows Ieyasu's brilliance at Sekigahara is not that he brings more men to the field, but that he subverts the unity of the opposite side.
Ieyasu sent agents to coax the commander of a sizable portion of the enemy force to change sides. It worked, and the Toyotomi forces were overwhelmed. It was an epic battle in samurai history. Tokugawa Ieyasu was now the undisputed military leader of Japan. Unlike his predecessor, he had every intention of claiming the venerated title of shogun. Tradition, of course, required that he be of Minamoto clan descent to qualify. He wasn't, but he devised a way to circumvent that annoying technicality.
Tokugawa Ieyasu had to present to the emperors a falsified genealogy in order to prove that he was a descendant of the Minamoto. And of course this was known to the imperial family, but it was a kind of a pro forma thing. And so once a fairly convincing document was presented to them, they could close an eye on whether it was absolutely historically accurate.
So I'm going to stop there. So he falsifies a document, presents it to the emperor, to the royal family, and he shows the proof that he was part of this royal lineage, and being a brilliant general as well, he comes to power. And like I said, the emperor is a figurehead, so the true ruler of Japan is this man, Tokugawa. I can't say that very well. Ieyasu. So life under Tokugawa, Japan. I'm butchering that name, I apologize. Confucian values, farming as I talked about, is valued above all else. But there's a shift that's beginning because of the growth of Edo, now by the 1600s the largest city in the world. The reason being, many of these peasants, farmers who had a very hard life, were overtaxed, overworked, overburdened. They began to move to the city, process of urbanization, and they did this at a very large scale. Today, modern Tokyo is one of the most advanced cities in the world in terms of technology and architecture, and still is one of the largest cities in the world. So culture in Tokugawa, Japan. Traditional culture continues. Things such as the Na, or Japanese dramas, and tales of samurais continued. But competition comes from arts in the cities. There's new styles of literature, art, and drama as people come to the city, and like we've seen in Europe during the Renaissance, the city is a place of cultural flowering and creativity. So fictional stories, haiku poetry, and kabuki theater become very popular. Let's take a look at what that looks like today, because it's still the most popular form of theater in Japan today. Kabuki theater involves elaborate costumes, using music, dance, and mime perform skits about modern life. So let's take a look at what that might look like.
Kabuki is a Japanese traditional theatre form which originated in the Edo period at the beginning of the 17th century and was particularly popular among townspeople. After 1868, when Japan opened up to Western influences, actors strove to heighten the reputation of Kabuki among the upper classes and to adapt the traditional styles to modern tastes. Today, Kabuki is the most popular of the traditional styles of Japanese drama.
So you see the elaborate costumes and the makeup, the whole performance, very theatrical, and still the most popular form of theater today. And it developed during this time in Tokugawa, Japan. Another form of art that developed was haiku. Haiku is a form of poetry that follows a 5-7-5 syllable routine, and it's meant to bring about imagery. For instance, this one here, this is an example of haiku, 5 syllables. This is my onesie, 7 syllables. It has a haiku on it, and 5 syllables. My parents are nerds. This becomes the most popular form of poetry in Japan at the time. So back to our slideshow. I've got 2 minutes to finish this. Japan and the Europeans. The Portuguese are the great explorers of Europe at the time, and just like they were the first to arrive to China and other parts of Asia, they're the first to arrive to Japan. They bring clocks, eyeglasses, tobacco, firearms, etc. And the daimyo were especially interested in guns, firearms. The Portuguese want to get involved in Japan's trade with China and Southeast Asia, and Japan initially is eager to receive newcomers and their goods and take place in this trading process. Christian missionaries begin to arrive in Japan. The Jesuits, Franciscans, and Dominicans, different orders, come to convert the Japanese. Conversions upset Tokugawa since missionaries scorned traditional Japanese beliefs such as Confucianism, and they got involved in local politics. By 1612, the shogun had banned Christianity and focused on ridding the country of all Christians. So there's a shift over time in terms of the acceptance of Christianity and missionaries. And Christians begin to be ruthlessly persecuted in Japan. This leads to a closed country policy. Strong leaders did not like the introduction of European ways because it disrupted the traditional culture of Japan. For 200 years, Japan remained basically closed to Europeans due to their closed country policy, much like China. The Japanese were forbidden to leave so as to not bring back foreign ideas, and they only traded with the Dutch at the Nagasaki port. Japan becomes very self-sufficient. They have to rely on themselves for growth and knowledge, education, all of these things that may have came from other countries if they were trading with them. But because they didn't and they isolated, they became very self-sufficient. And that is where we will end today.